Welcome to Business Agility Now, the podcast powered by Scaled Agile. I'm your host, Adam Mattis. This is the place to get advice, stories, and perspectives to help you work differently and build the future. Thanks for listening and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Harry, we're recording. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Are you
Fire
sure?
away. No.
So through my research, I have come to learn that you are the most low-key ninja on the framework team.
What does that mean?
It means that, for one, I had no idea that you had a PhD from Arizona State.
Oh,
And I immediately texted Joe. I said, how much trouble am I going to be in if I introduce Harry as Dr. Harry? He said, you probably better not do that for your own safety. Harry, I got to say, I've known you for a lot of years, but I don't feel like I've known you. And the more that I get to know you, the more that I'm just I'm humbled by all of the things that you are. And more than that, exactly how you just present as just being Harry.
Well, Adam, I thought we were going to talk about hardware. I'd much rather talk about hardware than talk about Harry, but we can talk about that if you'd like to.
Well, we need to, because I think what we've learned is that people really like people, right? And hardware is a lot of what you do, and it's super impressive. But I think what's cool about the hardware version of you is the path that got you there. And what I'm really interested to learn about is, how you got to us, Harry. So what is the Harry origin story? Where did you come from and how did you end up here with Scaled Agile? So I think we started I don't think I realized this either. I mean, we didn't start that far apart.
Yeah. Well, so I started out as a software person. I took a computer class my last semester of high school. First time they offered computers. I took it and I loved it. I couldn't wait to get the next assignment, went home and worked it out, and I was done with it, by hours later. Just loved it. So it was time to go to college. What do I do? I'll be a computer science major. Why not? So I did that, graduated, worked at Intel for a while, a couple years, and then decided to go back. A woman I work with at Intel, she went back to go teach at ASU, get her doctorate. And I thought, I'll go back to grad school because I could be her TA. So I went back to ASU, did grad school, worked at Intel at the same time, and just kind of stayed there because I had a great life. I loved it. And so in my 20s, having just enjoying learning. And as you mentioned, I got my PhD. And I stayed, but when I was working at Intel, I worked in the government division where we were taking chips. I worked on we had to write an ADA compiler for we had a chip that was going in the F-22, the main processor of the F-22, and ADA programming language was a programming language back then. So I got kind of into embedded systems then with ADA and embedded systems and working at Intel. And that was advantageous because I ended up, 8 years later, this is probably 92, 94, something like that. I started working a lot with government systems, defense systems, big cyber physical systems.
Oh, hold on, Harry. I want to pause you real quick because I think there's something really interesting in what you just said, because I think for a lot of people, they think of the F-22 as this, late 2010s, 2020 aircraft. And you just alluded that you were working on it in the early 90s. And I think it's such a cool thing that people don't realize. The tail on these 5th, 6th gen aircraft is so long.
Yeah. I don't think it flew until the 20s, but they started it, right? They were doing chip selection and, selection of processors and things back in the day. Yeah, back in 94 probably. Yeah. And then Agile hit. So as a software person, Agile hit. I was into architecture and modeling, because that was a big thing in the 90s, and design patterns. And then I kind of on the front wave of Agile. I worked with a small company. In fact, a couple of buddies of mine, they're still friends of mine. They landed a big contract with Cisco Systems to build the Network Academy. Cisco wanted to grow a learning program. So we basically offered online learning and exams and assessments and those types of things for Cisco, the Network Academy certifications that you get. We took that all online. That was late 80s, early 90s. But that was we met with George Ward, who was the customer, every Friday. He said, what do you want to see next week? What do you see next week? So that whole notion of fast feedback, continuous delivery was, that was 95, 96, 97, and then the .com industry kind of died then in the early 2000s. And I found myself doing a lot more government, back and doing a lot of government stuff here. And
Harry, were you in Arizona this whole time?
Whole time. Yeah.
So during that time, obviously, Intel's based right there. GoDaddy would have been fledgling, almost crashed
Yep.
and kind of resurrected around the same time.
Yep.
I'm
GoDaddy
trying
was
to
around
think
there.
who else was in town. There was a
From a defense perspective, there's Honeywell Aerospace that does commercial and defense. What was at the time Motorola, which they sold to General Dynamics when Motorola started to fall apart. General Dynamics had a huge division here. Boeing, the Apache helicopter, was built out. It was McDonnell Douglas, and Boeing bought them.
wow, I forgot about that. I remember I lived in Phoenix in the early 2000s. I remember seeing those fly over a lot.
Yeah.
And that what was the name of the Air Force base that's out there?
Well, there's Luke.
Yeah, Luke Air Force
Luke's
Base.
still there, and then Williams Gateway was an Air Force base, but in the '90s was one of the ones that was decommissioned. But Luke is still out there and operational.
And then Raytheon's down in Tucson really heavy too, right?
Yeah, huge. Raytheon is Tucson's biggest employer. Yeah, and one of the biggest employers in the state. Yeah, they're bigger than all the companies I mentioned, and they're down in
Wow.
Tucson. And so, yeah, it's just the opportunity to work here. I was working, did some work at General Dynamics, had met the Raytheon people, hadn't done any work with them. Then another buddy of mine, this is back in about 2004, 2005, we did a lot of work with Rational Software Development Group, right? So a lot of the products we used were ClearCase, ClearQuest at the time, which was in the 90s, the only big system version management tool you could actually have. Git wasn't available at the scale. And so all the engineering tools were from Rational. And then IBM acquired Rational around 2002. And IBM's a big partner company. Rational had no partners, right? We do it all ourselves. We don't trust anybody else. But IBM is the opposite. They rely on partners for a lot of their delivery. So I'd been doing a lot of work with these government programs and decided, and through a mutual friend worked at Rational, he connected us and we started a little Rational partner company around 95, about 04, 05. And that was a huge advantage to Harry because we became Rational's go-to partner in all these engineering space because Pat had connections. He'd had a kind of a job shop, a consulting company, really job placement companies. Had a bunch of people that worked at these engineering companies. He was an engineer as well, but we became kind of the go-to partner for them. So we got brought into a lot of other. So that's when it wasn't just Arizona; it was the rest of the country. So we were brought in by IBM to help them. And anytime you help people adapt to products, these new products, lean out, and it was more lean and agile then too. They had Team Concert, which was a competitor to Jira. Actually, was a much better product than Jira, in my personal opinion. It's just that they didn't market it very well, and it was IBM. Nobody wants to buy products like that from IBM. But the IBM engineering tools, to adopt the tools, you got to change your process. So a lot of it became not just, hey, you can't just build these big requirement specs anymore. Instead, you're going to have maybe a smaller requirement spec in Doors, a requirements tool, because some of your requirements are going to now go in backlogs. So we started having those conversations back in the late 90s we had to help engineers be able to adopt these tools by changing their process. And that kind of got us into Agile. It's interesting. When I first met Raytheon, they were the very first Agile company I met. This is back in probably, not big company Agile. They were doing Scrum in the software group down there 20 years ago.
And isn't it so funny how those companies go through waves where they go through, this big way of working and thinking, then they go back to some other way, then they come back around, and it's these interesting ebbs and flows. And then also just depending on who you're talking to within that massive enterprise can have an entirely different opinion about one way versus another.
It always starts in the software group, and that Raytheon group is a great example. Like they were pioneers in the software space, but then 4 or 5, as software starts going faster, you run to the next delay. Where's the next delay? And so they were one of the early people to move into other parts of the engineering organization to become more agile and adopt Scrum and Scrum practices. They were kind of leaders. It's interesting. A lot of organizations they don't talk about it, right? You'll never see Raytheon talking about all the cool agile things we're doing or any of these big system builder companies, which is a challenge now. I think that fast forward to 20 years later, we've gone through the early the innovators like a Raytheon and the early majority, and we're probably even we're moving now to a later majority to say, well, show me the case studies of people that actually did this and it's made money for them. It's like, well, those people don't want to talk about it. So that's it's interesting how to your point, how companies have evolved and we're kind of in that state of our world with Agile.
I mean, that's the truth about the secret sauce, right? I mean, you'll find a lot of people that like to talk about team level things. You'll find some people that like to talk about team of teams
Yeah,
level
right.
things. But when you start talking about portfolio management and solution management, if they've won, they're not going to tell you why they won, right? They're not going to share that information. It's their competitive advantage. I mean, if Raytheon comes out and
Right.
says, this is exactly how we did it, and then like a Northrop is like, oh, well, thank you for that. We will take that and improve it and be more competitive the next time. And to your point, when you look at those, the late majority, they're largely companies that are safer from disruption. You look at the large utilities, you look at oil and gas and companies like that, and you can make a case for why, but their tipping point and their reason's different. And for them, it's really just about, as you said, it's about efficiencies. It's about, well, can I get a cost savings? Can I get an extra, nickel per quarter per share or whatever it might be? Is this going to get me there? It's not that they're bidding for competitive or bidding against competitors. I mean, if you're looking at like in Brazil, Petrobras, no one else is drilling in Brazil, right? I mean, they're the only ones building platforms, drilling rigs. I mean, I was talking to a gentleman there from Petrobras when I was in Singapore, and his whole job is engineering the offshore oil platforms. And he's trying to think about, I guess, agility and hardware in an entirely different context.
Yeah.
His motivator is, I'm tired of managing so many suppliers to build so many different models of platform. Wouldn't it be cool if I could build one platform that's modular, and then you have the core platform, and based on, I guess the seafloor, the conditions, and all the other things, just bolt other things on it to make it more effective. So he's got a very different driver than someone who's trying to be competitive and get products out the door faster. It's a really interesting context when you get with these late majority companies.
Well, it's ironic they call it a platform, because that's what we mean by a platform in software, right? So he's trying to build a platform.
Yeah, a literal
platform isn't really a platform, right? But you want it to be one.
Well, shoot, now that we say it, that's a perfect metaphor for modular architecture. You've got a literal platform, and you want the platform to do different things just by bolting different things to it. And you want to be able to pull those things off without disrupting the core of the platform. Maybe that's it, Harry. Maybe oil platforms, offshore drilling rigs are the perfect metaphor for modular architecture.
Right. There you go. Yeah. We'll start that now. Yeah. And well, that's, and so I like to say I've made a career out of taking software things and bringing them to the hardware world. Right. And that's where it honestly started, right? Because I did a lot of modeling and architecture back in the 90s. Well, all of a sudden that became in vogue. Modeling died in software, but SysML and system modeling became very in vogue in the 2000s. System engineers, system engineering became a critical role. So you can't just have all these engineers building their own parts. It's not going to integrate at the end. Mechanical, electrical, fluids, those types of folks. And plus, who's going to manage the allotment, right? Hardware things, physical things have finite amount of resources. There is only so much weight. There is only so much power. There is only so much, right? And so who governs that and manages it and manages those allocations and things? So that, and modeling has been a great way of, they used to do that all on paper. And so a big evolution for that was in modeling. And I think you see that going on now, right? So in hardware, modeling has become the thing, and it's become such a thing that people are taking models and creating amazing simulations. And kind of the leader in that space is F1, right? So keep the conversation going in divergent areas, but modeling has evolved, and now like F1, they model everything. The cars model, the parts of the car model, the driver's model, the future, the track we're racing at in 2 weeks is modeled, right? And so they run all kinds of simulations across these things and say, okay, we want to rig the car this way with these kinds of tires, this kind of suspension, with this kind of settings. And then they run their practice route, their practice laps, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, prepare for the race on Sunday. And the practice laps really just validating the models. Right, so they go run the practice lap and learn and go adjust the models, run simulations, and then the models say, okay, adjust the car this way. And then they run that. And it's ironic because in F1, the fastest car on Thursday, whenever they start those test trials, would be the slowest car on Sunday. They learn that much in that number of days because they have the digital engineering environment for the learning. Right, they basically have taken hardware and turn it into software.
Well, and then through additive manufacturing, they can print those new parts right there on site. So whether it's chopped
Yep.
carbon, or whether it's, DMLS, and you can actually print metal parts right there on site.
Yep.
You can model it, test it, tweak it, learn it, and do it again right there without ever leaving the track. And it's such a cool thing. And when you look at, that power that you talk about in F1, I mean, that's the bleeding edge of innovation, right?
Yeah.
They are arguing over hundredths of a second, and every hundredth matters.
Yep.
But then if you look at, you can apply those same concepts to different contexts, and it disrupts the whole hardware space, because you no longer have to have so much time, energy, and cash resources to build a prototype. I mean, right? You think about, again, with additive manufacturing, in comparison to setting up an entire factory to print or to create metal parts, the cost of a DMLS printer that can print an engine block is $300,000. So you're $300,000 investment versus tens of millions of dollars to stand up a factory.
Yeah.
Well, between digital simulation, between modeling, and between the ability to print and test parts and pivot quick, the cost of startup is now a small fraction of what it used to be, which means the barrier to entry is so much lower for all kinds of cool things.
Yep. I've heard another rapid metal making technology. So I know about additive and 3D printing. I've also just saw a thing in the last couple of weeks called roboforming. You ever heard of roboforming?
No. Tell me about
Basically, it. So the sheet metal stamping, right? So you have to have a whole manufacturing line to do sheet metal stamping. This is, they take a digital model and they basically take a piece of sheet metal, and they've got these roller things that then reshape the sheet metal. So you can make a part. It's fast in 3D printing. It's cheaper than 3D printing. It doesn't work for every part, but for like sheet metal type parts, it's actually faster, cheaper, and it's simple.
And what's so interesting about that is it's actually detecking the manufacturing process. If you remember back in the early 2000s, when like West Coast choppers and American choppers were really popular shows on TV, what was so special about like those craftspeople was their ability to take a piece of sheet metal, and with a hammer and a roller and just some different forms, they'd hammer it out. And that sounds basically like what you've described, just a robotic version. So you create the part digitally and you hit go, and somebody else that's a robot is hammering it out.
It is. It's a robotic craftsman, right? It is. They equated that. Back it used to be craftsmen that made parts, and then we went to automation with stamping, and now we're coming back to automate robotic craftsmen, basically, to make the parts.
While I'm sitting in the studio today, I thought I'd take a minute to talk to you about Safe Studio, a game-changing platform for learning and practicing safe, no matter where you are in your safe journey. Picture this: your team streamlined like never before, with common self-paced learning and the right assets at the right time, all at their fingertips. Safe Studio isn't just a tool, it's a breakthrough in aligning your team's effort with your big picture goals. And we've all been there. You go to a training class and you leave with all this energy and great ideas, but you get back to your desk on Monday and you're a little bit lost about how to apply all of that great content to your context. Well, Safe Studio helps you avoid that ambiguity by providing clarity, efficiency, and most importantly, resources to help you hit the ground running in your new way of working. But Safe Studio doesn't stop there. You'll also find tools to connect to the greater Scaled Agile community. Simplified course management in the virtual classroom, access to all of our platforms like piplanning.io, Comparative Agility, and others. You'll find templates to facilitate product development activities and safe events, along with toolkits, video tutorials, and good gracious, so much more. Check out Safe Studio today and see for yourself at safe.scaledagile.com. Now, back to the show. All right, Harry, so let's get back on track here. All right, so how did you end up in the sphere of Scaled Agile?
Great. Well, so when we left off in Harry's journey, he was an IBM partner. We had an IBM partner company, and we were doing a lot of Agile things with companies, right? And got called in a lot of automotive, aerospace, defense companies. And they're moving their way to not just software, but it's the system that has to be Agile, right? The systems we build aren't just all our software. There's also hardware. And we had ideas we were explaining. And then around 2012 or 13, Dean started publishing Scaled Agile Framework. And Ken France at the time, you probably know Ken, now at C Prime, but he was with Blue Mercury. He was also an IBM partner. So we met him early on in our IBM partner days. We'd be in the same booth at the IBM events and saying hi to each other and talking. And we didn't play in a lot of the same spaces. He was more IT, we were more engineering. So we were kind of, frenemies, if you will, IBM partners, but we didn't bump into a lot of the common customers. Well, he had bumped into Dean. It was he was one of the very first. He was in, I think, the very first SBC class, the very first one, and I think he was talking to one of our sales guys, Brian, and said, "Hey, you guys got to check out the safe thing." And so we contacted Dean and said, "Hey, we'd like to be a partner." He said, "Great." I went to my leading safe class. I think it was in the 2.0 days. It was Safe 2.0 back then. Went to implementing, so implementing safe, and then talked to Dean about becoming a partner and said, "But we're in the engineering space. We would like to take the framework and get." And people say it's a very software-looking framework today. It was really software-looking framework back in 2.5. And so, well, if you take this to engineering group, they'd say, well, that's what the software teams do. Hardware teams, we have our own process, right? No. It's one process for the system. That's where we got to get, we got to get people thinking that way. It's not two separate processes. It's not a separate process per domain. It's one set of process for the whole system to build.
Harry, that's so funny. I think my first interaction with Dean wasn't dissimilar because I was talking to him. I was at my immersion week, and I went to implementing in 2.5 as well, and I think I was in 3 when I did immersion week. I don't remember. But I remember the first time I talked to Dean. I mean, that day one of immersion week, we were kind of getting to know everybody, and he was asking about my background, and I said, "Well, I love product. Product is my thing." And I'll never forget, at the end of the week, he'll say, "I just don't understand what you're doing here. You're a product guy. This stuff is software. It doesn't apply to product." And I was like, "Oh." It took me probably 3 years to be able to stand next to Dean again because I felt like such an imposter. But I realize now, knowing Dean as I do, it was never meant to be like this, "What are you doing here?" It was more of, "Well, that's curious. Tell me more." But I was too terrified to tell him more.
Yeah. Well, it's funny when you meet people like Dean, that they're, you have this assumption of what they're thinking, and when they say something, you're kind of biased to it. And then you learn more about, no, they're just super inquisitive and they just want to know more. And why is a product guy in my class? And yeah. So going back to the, so anyway, that's when I first met Dean too, was I think 2013, 14, something like that, maybe early 2014, I think it was. And we said, we got to take all the software stuff out of this. And you mind if we do a spike on a different BP that we could take to our engineering people? And Dean being Dean, he said, well, let's do that together. If you want to spike something, let's do it together. So it didn't start much in 2014. I was busy with work and things. So I think towards later 2014, we kind of started in earnest. And then 2015, we had the Safe for Lean System Engineering beta. Brought in all kind of engineering. All those Raytheon people came in, and a bunch of other folks came in, so I was working with them quite a bit then. And this is one of those like MVP things. Could we have learned this with a smaller batch? Right? Because it was a big batch. There was a whole website. There was a whole framework. There was a whole course for Safe for Lean System Engineering. And what we learned was that don't have two frameworks. If you have the IT framework and the engineering framework, there's different terms for the roles, different terms for backlogs. And because even that's true. Even back at Raytheon with the missile, there's some offline IT stuff that's doing all the telemetry and gathering all the data. And the people building the IT infrastructure, they don't want them using different terms or words or terminology than the people doing the engineering part. It's a system. It's a solution, as we call it, right? It's got all kind of different elements to it. So that was the lesson learned, was go back and merge these things. But a lot of the things we did in LSE became part of what then became Safe 4. Everything in the large solution. In fact, Safe didn't even have a solution in it, right? There was no system, right? So we had a system in Safe LSE. The customer wasn't on the big picture. The value streams were kind of not well represented. So we learned a lot in that year, and I think Safe 4 became just really a monumental leap forward for the framework.
Well, I think Safe 4 is still, to date, probably I'll say the most significant evolution of the learning of the framework. And sure, we've fine-tuned it a lot since then, and there's been a lot of other really great additions. But when you look at the shift from 3 to 4, right, and we talk about large solutions, we introduce the concepts of value streams, that's really where it went from being this niche IT thing to something that could really help a large enterprise win. And I think what we learned was there's a difference between having the IP in there and having the expertise in the field to apply the IP. Because I remember I had a consulting team I won't mention the client, but I had a big consulting team in a company when 4.0 came out, and they were trying to apply large solution to everything. And I was like, no, 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 like this, not the intent. Like, I appreciate what you're thinking and what you're trying to do. However, this is not the intent of this IP, right? There, and I think we see it a lot where we see people try and apply a lot of the whole of that context to the things where it doesn't really fit. Not to say there's not concepts in there that are great that don't apply to a lot of contexts, but I think sometimes we try and make everything fit in a neat box where it doesn't necessarily need
Right.
to.
Yep. So my work, yeah, great point. So my work here at Scaled Agile is done, kind of, but I stayed on as an adjunct to the framework team, right? So I kind of work part time. In fact,
Yeah.
I think Dean paid me halftime with my IBM partner company, 321 Gang. And so I was doing which I loved. I was in the field doing a lot of safe work at these engineering companies. You know, we're the engineering companies. We tried to safe for O came out. We wanted to bring this into all those engineering companies. So a lot of training, but stayed part of Safe 4.5, Safe 4.6. And Dee and I a couple times had talked about joining Scaled Agile, but I really liked, I had a lot of friends at 321 Gang. I had a lot of friends at Scaled Agile too. So it was kind of like, and it was good. I got to do, be in the mix of both. And finally, I kind of looked at it like I'm having a lot more fun at Scaled Agile. Don't tell Pat that. But I enjoyed both. And right as I was thinking that, this is how it actually, here's how I ended up Scaled Agile. Do you remember the Safe Summit event down in Texas? You were there? Yeah, I think San Antonio. And at the end of the second day, they have the offsite, right? The kind of the party, the celebration. And we took buses out to basically a rodeo, and they had kind of a rodeo group that did a little rodeo thing. And ironically, I'm walking along the bus, and Dean happened to walk on the bus together. We happened to sit next to each other. So I just sat next to Dean, and he was just commenting, "Hey Harry, this halftime thing with us is really going, it's really going great. It's been good having you be part of the team." He said. Then that I just mentioned to him. Remember when we talked about me joining? And he's like, "Oh, what do you think?" So anyway, so that's how that event was the one where I said, "Yeah, I'm going to join." So about six or 8 weeks later, we worked out all the negotiations and joined Scaled Agile.
That event was so special for a lot of reasons, right? I mean, that was the first summit event. I mean, there was so much energy that came from that event in San Antonio. And, when you talk to people in the community today, they still talk about it. It's interesting what a tipping point that specific event was for so many people in so many different regards. So it's cool to hear that was, yours as well. I mean, I hear it in the market often.
My tipping event as well. Yeah. Small world. Well, and maybe that's why, because you go there and it's like, okay, I got to move it, because it's a lot of energy. And that's what in-person events do, is they create that kind of energy. And I think we forgot about that in COVID. And that's why every event is kind of down, right? Agile Alliance, a lot of them are just, they're not at the numbers that they used to be. And I think they're slowly getting built back up because people don't remember the power of these events and the power of community.
And that's true. I mean, for the last better part of 2 years, I've been forcing in-person implementing safe classes through our immersion week events. And just, I've even gone back to in-person meetups. And I'll never forget the very first meetup I did in person post-COVID. There were 30 people that came. We did it in collaboration with C Prime. And there were a handful of people that were telling me that they were sitting in the parking lot in the car trying to decide whether or not they could go because they were just so nervous to be around people again. And then, I mean, universally, everyone that comes is super glad they came. And the same thing with those in-person classes. I know with the last event we did in Singapore, it took a lot to get people in there because culturally in Singapore, everyone is pretty much not in the office. And when we said, no, you're going to come to the classroom, there was a lot of apprehension. And universally at the end, they said, I cannot believe how much I miss this. Just being around people, the energy, it's all completely different. And I think you're right. We've missed that. And what's interesting and a little concerning is there's a whole generation of people that have never really had that in-person experience because they came of age through high school or early college during COVID. So they finished those formative years behind a screen. They never really had to come out from behind the screen. They started working from home. And now we start telling them, hey, you need to collaborate with people and spend more FaceTime. And you don't have to come to the office every day, but we need to spend time together sometimes. And there's such a strong pushback because I just think they don't know what they're
Right.
missing.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I remember.
so we're coming back to in person. Harry, I want to steer us a
All
little
right.
bit towards the cool stuff you're doing now, right? So you joined Scaled Agile and you've been doing cool things since, right? So we've released 5.0, we've released 5.1, we've evolved to 6. Internally, we've completely changed our learning platforms. We've changed so much stuff, but I think the thing that stayed consistent is your focus on hardware and architecture and deep engineering practices. And if you talk to any of our European friends right now, I mean, I think the work that you've done has had as much as or more of an impact on the German automotive sector than probably anyone else, right? If you look at what's taking place at some of those big manufacturers and the push for safer hardware and thinking in those ways, it's got your fingerprints all
Well,
over it.
thanks for that. I think it's been a community, honestly, and that's, I think, going back when you talked about the San Antonio event, you got me thinking about the power of SAFE, right? This little framework Dean put together on a website, on a cover of a book, and they made a website about it, a blog about it. He's brought a diverse set of people together as a common community with with a common background, common way of thinking, common language, right? Common, literature review, Reinertson, and, we're from the same background. So, we have a very strong community of people. I won't name them because I'll forget names, but we have partners and community over in Europe that are really strong in the hardware space. So I think that, I thank you for all the credit. I mean, we've been trying to go down this path, but we're lucky that we have a huge community. And to your point, we're working on safer hardware right now. We have an SPCT group, that's been meeting every Tuesday for 9 months after the last summit, the summit that we had in, where was it? Nashville. During the SPCT day, this group of hardware focused, cyber physical focused people said, we got to keep this going. So we kept a weekly call going. And that's very fortunate because we've decided now to go down a path to make some new hardware concept, new hardware training. And we're leveraging that same community, folks in Europe, folks here in the US that are in this space. So I really thank you for that. I think there's a nice force that SAFE has actually energized a group of people down a common path with a common language, with a common literature background, common way of thinking. That is a force that I think is going to benefit that whole industry, automotive, not just automotive, but all the people build cyber physical systems.
When I think about some of the people that are in that cohort, one or two specifically, what I think is really cool is some of them have mostly retired, and this is what they're doing for their fun retirement project. I'm thinking of one specifically who retired last year, the year before, and then she wrote a book with another amazing woman in the hardware space, and she's a professor, and she's traveling and doing like these.
Is that the book?
Yep, that's the one right there. That would be Robin and Suzette. But yeah, it's just an amazing group of people, and I think what people need to remember about our community and the work that we do. We don't want to pretend that Scale Agile is not out there to generate revenue and to make profit, right? Because this is a capitalist society, and we're here for a reason. However,
well, I want to keep my job. That's my main goal, is so I can keep doing this. So we need enough money for us to keep doing what we're doing.
That's a reason, but it's not the reason, right? When you look at people like Robin and people like Suzette and people like you, the goal is to make things better so that we can build impressive things faster. And whether those things are pieces of hardware or pieces of software or cyber physical platforms that can automatically diagnose cancer leveraging AI, right? That's why you do it. I mean, that's the intrinsic motivation, and the intrinsic motivation is much stronger than the financial motivation. It goes back to the Dan Pink context of when the profit motive becomes unmoored from the purpose motive. Well, I mean, in this group, it's the exact opposite, right? It's all about the purpose motive, and as a byproduct of that purpose, there's some profit, but it's not really about that, right? And when you mention that group of people that are working on this, they're doing it because they love it, right? A lot of them are retired. Nobody's being compensated. It's just we've identified a hard problem. We've built a group of really passionate, excited, and smart people focused on solving that problem for the purposes of making things better for the people doing that work in the field.
Agreed. Yeah, and we're lucky that we've all been able to find each other. I think that Dean's framework that he started eons ago, and they grew into what is now Safe Six, and it's not just a framework; it's a whole community of people, right? And it's both.
Well, it's more than a framework too. I mean, it's a whole assortment of support mechanism too, because there's the framework and the framework
True.
site and all of the words that are behind that. But then there's all of the things that different smart and creative people have created to make those things applicable and digestible for everybody, right? And that's
Yep.
not to get too nerdy about the work that we do, but it's why, I'm still here. It's why I do the things that I do, because I think
Yeah.
what we do is so important and so powerful in making an impact in the world that we've got to make it accessible and reachable to everybody, right? Because our community is
Yeah.
small, right? You look at the size of our team, it's small. You look at the size of our community in the grand scope of business and technology, it's pretty small too. But when you look at the orders of magnitude that are the number of people that have been touched by, you know, that book, that picture, that blog, and then everything else that we've done, it's unreal, right? And there's a lot of
Yeah.
people that have varying opinions, and there's things that we're learning, and that's all welcome. But I think when it comes right down to it, we still live and breathe the purpose that is our mission statement, right? We want to help people work differently so they can build the future. That's why we all do what we do.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. I think we've helped different communities at different times, right? Safe started in software, and then we needed going to spin this back to hardware. And so kind of software's kind of, big software system has been validated. It works there. The next was, okay, well, how do you explain, you were talking about how do you explain it, this new way of working? How do you explain it to government? Okay, well, I've got earned value. I've got work breakdown structures. I've got, things I have to do. It was a bridge too far for me to see. I see lean portfolio management and value streams. I don't. So we need to say for government class for some period of time to explain it till this becomes the new way of working. And I think we have the same challenge now for people to build, large hardware and cyber physical systems. Is a lot of the innovators, early adopters can look at the safe framework and say, "Oh, I see how it applies it. I see how I can change the way I work currently to go to that route." But not everybody can, especially at large scale.
Sure.
So that's why I think we need and are working on new offerings for this hardware and cyber physical space to go explain, the practices and how lean agile practices can apply to the building of these big cyber physical systems.
Harry, in your experience, is that conversation always kind of two way? And I'll explain why I asked that from my own experience. I was working with a cruise line, and they wanted to use Safe to help them build a cruise ship. And we used the
Hmm.
large solution context, and we looked at it through a lot of different ways. And I said to the group, I said, "Look, I love that you want to do it this way, and I love that you want to apply these concepts." And I said to them, I just don't see how to do it. And they said, "Don't worry, we'll show you." And that was probably the coolest engagement that I ever was a part of, that I felt so guilty for taking a paycheck for, because I mean, I put some guardrails in
Because you
place,
learn.
but I learned so much more from that team than they ever learned from me.
Well, that's the little secret of consulting, is right. A lot of times you're learning as much as the people you're consulting with, right? And then you take that knowledge and experience, go to the next gig, and you grow that knowledge and experience, and that's always true. That's why I love being in the field. There's always an opportunity to learn, and the way it typically happens for me is you identify the person in the organization that and tip them, and there's usually somebody that's influential, somebody that's open-minded, is approachable about new ideas, and if you get that person tipped, they will tip other people into learning, and that's usually how, when I've been doing in my last 25 years or so of doing consulting, when I was engaged in organizations, that was usually the case. But I don't have all the answers for them. Once you tip that person, they're the ones that are going to take it deeper and say, okay, here's how we work today. Like as a General Motors, I don't know completely how General Motors works, but there's a really brilliant gentleman named Len who, if you explain safe and lean and agile to him, he looks at the rest of General Motors, the 12,000 engineers that work there, and say, okay, we can now operate differently this way with value streams and with And I happened to bump into General Motors on 2 occasions. One was with IBM doing the engineering tools, and then years later, when I'm now at Scaled Agile, when GM started doing the safe adoption. And it's interesting. The pattern works the same. Is you take the person that knows deeply about the organization, but that also can make the connection with Lean and Agile, and then you're there to help them with Lean and Agile, kind of coach them in that path while they take it deeper into their enterprise.
Harry, I think you just hit on something that's a really important lesson for a lot of consultants and people. And I think especially young in their career, a consultant will go into a situation like that and feel like they have to have all the answers and try and tell a Len exactly how to apply whatever it is. It doesn't have to be Lean and Agile. It could be anything across the organization. And they don't have the confidence enough to know what they know and then let the Len, kind of guide them through the rest.
Well, and say, I don't know. You have to have a concept, I don't know. And I'm going to pull on that. Some of the biggest challenges I've heard from, people that are fellows at these big organizations, they've brought in people from the Agile community, well-known people. You would know the name that I'm thinking of in the Agile community. Well, they come in assuming they have to know all the answers. And this individual said that we had to have them leave because they were disrupting, right? They were telling people, well, you have to build your hardware every 2 weeks, and we have to, but you can't, right? You've got to meet a community where they are. You can't walk into a hardware team and say, well, every 2 weeks we're going to demo your parts. Well, no, you're not. You're just not, right? You're going to demonstrate knowledge, demonstrate learning, maybe demonstrate a mock-up or a model or a simulation or something. But you to your point, what you know is that fast feedback is good, and continuous and frequent integration is good, and then try to encourage those organizations. Well, how can we learn faster? How can we integrate more frequently? How can we take the stuff they're doing over there and bring in the stuff you're doing over here? What would that look like? And what could we learn if we did that? Sure. And just bringing that mindset to the organization, but you don't have the answers, so you have to let the organization, the people in the organization figure out how to make it happen.
It's so powerful. I mean, it's, meet them where they're at and then having the confidence to say, I don't know, let's learn together. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
So Harry, we've got just a few minutes left here, and I'd like to kind of close out and just, talk through a little bit about the Safe for Hardware course that you mentioned, kind of what's going on with that, when we can expect to see it and play with it. If you want to give a shout out to the folks that you're collabing with internally, like what's going on with Safe for Hardware?
So we are a mighty team of 2, instructional designer and me. I have a lot of content. I've been, we've been pulled in this direction for a while. So I've been fortunate to have a lot of engagements for the last 2 years with hardware. So we have a lot of material already. What we've learned is that, we need a leadership course and a teams course. I don't know how much detail I get into our roadmap of things, but we're working on them now, and some enablement for SPCs. So expect that we're starting with like a leadership type course. How do you lead these types of companies? Kind of like Safer Gov was, right? We did a branch of Safer Gov. We think we need a different explanation than just Safer, that it addresses all their concerns of building big, cyber physical hardware systems. It isn't just hardware though; it's also the big cyber physical. It's not. We don't just want to focus just on hardware. It's also how do you big cyber physical systems, compliance, suppliers, supply chains. Get those people on board. So we're working on that now. I don't know if I should talk about dates candidly, but we're working on it now, and we're going to be doing some alphas in the next month or 2, and then release to come soon.
That's great. You don't have to give us a date, but we know it's coming soon.
Yeah, exactly. Expect for more announcements later this year on betas and dates. Certainly, you will hear more this year for sure.
I think what's cool about our current operating context is that we're moving faster than we have in a lot of years. And there's going to be some really cool things coming a lot faster than folks might expect. So that's pretty exciting stuff, and hardware is one of them.
Well, you mentioned when I first got here, we were a mighty team of 3 that developed the Agile Software Engineering course. You mentioned the technical practices. So we kind of used to work in like smaller teams to crank things out, and we're doing that again right now with this. This is kind of the first instructor-led course we've had in a while, right? So we're going back to the model we used to do with instructor-led courses for this kind of instructor-led course.
That's exciting stuff.
Yeah, super exciting. I'm very excited.
Well, Harry, to wrap this up, I just want to close real quick by saying thank you. And I want to thank you because the fact that you and I are sitting here right now having this conversation on this recorded podcast, it's a result of advice and a recommendation you gave me, I think 3 years ago, which was to pick this thing up. And it's, it was meant to be a bit of a creative outlet. And with the mighty team that has self-organized around it, we've built a pretty cool thing. I mean, I don't know if you know the data behind it, but I'm happy to share it with you. I mean, we're reaching something like 25,000 people per episode per month.
Wow.
Which I didn't think was a big deal. When in my, Adam brain, I was like, well, that's not a lot. And I was talking to a PR person a few weeks ago, and he kept asking about the podcast. And I eventually got a little frustrated. I was like, look, man, this is something we do. It's a passion project. Like I thought he was kind of making fun of me.
Really?
I was like, I know it's not that big. It's something that we do because it provides value to our community and we enjoy doing it. And he's like, I don't think you understand. He said, when we place people on podcasts, there's 3 tiers. And the top tier is 16,000 downloads a month and more. And he said, you're almost twice that. Like, you've got something really special. I want to start putting people on your podcast.
That's awesome.
And I thought that was really cool because we haven't built this intentionally to be, anything more than a value to our community, but it's turned into something that's apparently helping a lot of people. And I want to thank you for the nudge to do it. So thank you for your.
I remember that conversation. That's very cool. I'm glad. I'm excited, happy, and astounded at the results. That's great. 16,000. That's huge. Huge.
16,000 is the threshold. We're at 25,000.
Wow. Oh, right. You're 25. Yeah. God, that's more clicks than we get on WSGF every month. So that's pretty impressive on the website.
It's nuts. Well, I'm really glad to have you on here, and I'm really glad that I'll say tactfully pushed you to do something that you're not comfortable doing, which is talk about yourself, Harry, because the impact that you've had in our community is much greater than you give yourself credit for. You're one of the most humble and kindest people I know, and I'm glad people get to know you a little bit better. Harry, thank you so much for making the time, and I will see you in DC soon.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you like what you hear, please refer us to your friends and colleagues and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Adam Mattis. See you next time.